One palette we'll see frequently in Civil 3D is the Panorama palette. The Panorama represents a universal palette used to provide design information and editing tools for many types of objects. In this lesson, we'll take our first look at the Panorama palette. On my screen is a drawing that represents a rural intersection. As you can see, it contains several Kogo points, some feature lines, and a surface that was built from that data. Let's say that I would like to review some of the point data. To do that, I will select a couple of these points, and then from the contextual ribbon, I'll choose Edit List Points. This brings up the Panorama palette. From here, I can review and make changes to this information if I want to. Let me press Escape a couple times to deselect. Now, it's important to note that the Panorama palette is a container that holds these tabs called vistas. Since I'm working with points, it brought up the Point Editor vista. After I'm finished reviewing and making changes to this data, I can close the vista by clicking this green check. I will also press Escape to deselect these points. Now, let's say I'd like to make a change to a feature line. I'll select this one, and then from the ribbon, I'm going to choose Elevation Editor. Once again, this brings up the Panorama palette, and I can review and edit the data associated with this feature line. Since we're working with a feature line, the Panorama contains a vista called Grading Elevation Editor. Once again, I'm not going to make any changes. We'll edit some feature lines a little later in the title. For right now, I'm going to close the Panorama, except this time I'm going to do it a different way. I'm going to come up and click the X. I will then press Escape to deselect the feature line. Now, why did I show you that? Well, if you close the Panorama when there is a vista active, that vista remains with the Panorama. So in the event the Panorama is displayed later, that vista will come along for the ride. For example, I'm going to select one of these points, and then I'll come up and choose Edit List Points. And you can see not only do we have the Point Editor vista, but we still have the original Grading Elevation Editor vista. I show you this because when I first started using Civil 3D, I was asking myself, hey, why do I have all these tabs stacking up in here? I really only want the point editor right now, but for some reason, I've got tabs that represent data that I haven't looked at for an hour. Well, the problem I had was the way I was closing the Panorama palette. The rule of thumb is if you want to close a tab or a vista, you'll click the green check. To simply hide the display of the Panorama, you'll click this X. Let's look at one more thing before I close this. Over here in the tool space, we'll find a toggle that can be used to display the Panorama. If I close the Panorama while there's a vista active, I can come back and redisplay the Panorama by clicking this button. For right now, I'm finished working with the Panorama and this point data. Let's close the Point Editor vista by clicking the green check. We will be seeing the Panorama palette frequently in this title. In fact, most every Civil 3D object can be reviewed and edited in some way using this tool. Now that we understand the basics of how the palette works, we are ready to use it and dismiss it whenever it pops up in future lessons.